Hello, my name is Andrew Francis. Whilst I've been furloughed from my work as an ecologist specialising in bird survey, I've been improving my botanical skills and creating methods to handle and display data from the National Biodiversity Network Atlas. Learning in the field provides tactile and olfactory cues and a sense of scale that you just don't get from reading books. Not only is it enjoyable, but it ensures that one can properly apply the field characteristics that are described in books and to fix this information in one's memory. Many characteristics are subjective, and if a target species are not present, then a beginner may unwittingly warp their interpretation of these criteria to fit the more visible species. This confusion is easier to avoid if beginners know of recent and accurate locations where they can compare similar species side by side. My methods use free or widely used software to prioritize learning objectives and to recursively plan and follow individual itineraries. The end results include custom tick lists and maps like this one, a screenshot from my mobile phone, which can show locations of target species, parking places, bus stops, routes between these locations, and the boundaries of protected areas. As of this month, the National Biodiversity Network Atlas holds over 230 million species records from over 900 different data sets and is a helpful tool for planners and ecologists trying to minimize environmental impacts and to propose conservation strategies. I hope that by making it easier for naturalists to seek out the threatened and dwindling islands of biodiversity, more people will contribute to its data. Popular apps such as iRecord or iNaturalist make it easy to distribute data between experts who can validate it and pass it on to the NBN and local biological record centres.
Today I'm going to show you how to use some custom data handling subroutines in Excel to create targeted data searches online, how to remove unrequired data fields, and to quickly import other data to create catalogues of waypoints and gazetteers of study information. I'll show you how to import waypoints and plan out routes online using Google Maps. Briefly, I will touch on the immense capabilities of QGIS, where they regard creating complex symbologies, selecting data and exporting different file types. You'll see how I use the amazing Street View of Google Earth to find parking places. And lastly, I will compare in detail 3 very solid phone apps for field studies. From the complex but cutting-edge QField with the most customizable base maps and support for symbology, to Maps.me with its simplicity and dependable offline caching, and not least the brilliantly usable Google Maps. This is the NBN's homepage, a front end of a vast data resource, where you can also learn about the organisations who provide their data, read Naturalists' blogs, and learn how you can support the NBN's work through membership, donation and biological recording. The site works as an online geographical information system with many options for exploring data and for viewing, importing and even creating other layers. For more detailed examination, it's helpful to download the data so you can investigate it without having to worry about connection speeds. I will pause my recording from time to time to allow things to load. I'll show you a basic data search using a radius, how I download the data, and what I do with it when I have. To do a radius search, I go to Locations, Explore by Address, Postcode or Location. So initially it says Nottingham. It's loaded up with my address because I've allowed it to access to my location. It's not quite right, but it's very, very close. And you will see there's an indented list on the left-hand side. The level of indentation shows you how these different groups are nested within each other. So crustaceans, insects, myriapods, etc., and the arthropods, which are in the category animals, etc. And the biggest search has 4,990 species, etc. So this is quite handy. One of the options here, you'll see the map just populated with all those records. One of the options here is this drop-down list with a radius. Now, a radius corresponds to this value in the URL, this number 12, and you'll see that if I change this That number will also change. It's gone from 12 to 13. I did experiment to see if I could get other ranges of radii from this, but I was not successful in doing so. So 10k is the biggest that I can get with this. I'm going to make quite a non-selective search here so I can show you how I filter my data with Excel in a moment. So I'm just going to go to download here. Take a moment. Oh, that was very fast. So there are two options in step one. You could go for a species checklist, which will download very fast as a comma separated value file, which will just turn up in the bottom left of your screen here. Or if you go for occurrence records, it will send you an email with a download link. That's the option that I'm going for. So go for an informative title. Edinburgh 2 kilometre radius. CSV, as I say, that's the default that I'm going with. Simple spreadsheet format, that's fine. Industry/application, I select public, and it notes this is for personal use only. Have a read of the licensing. I've read it, accept it, and press next, and it will download. So now it's just a matter of going to your email. I'll show you one I've loaded earlier, it's this one. So there are two URLs in here. This top URL is the search which was passed through this URL at the top here, and the one just below it is the one you need, so you copy and paste that, Control C, Control V to paste it, and enter, and it downloads in the bottom left of the screen. So I use 7-zip for this. 7-zip's open. It's in my downloads folder. So I go to extract, and I always put these things on my desktop because some of them I'm going to get rid of immediately. Some I'm going to do a little work with and then get rid of them. So if it's on my desktop, then these kind of ephemeral files don't build up and use space. So there are 3 files that I'm not going to use this time. These are readme, headings and citation. Remaining file contains the data that I'm interested in. I'm just going to load that up now. Looking at this data file, you'll see that it's absolutely massive. So if I press Control and right from the first cell A1, see this is 55 different cells wide and nearly 67,000 records. Big file. So the first thing I want to do is to reduce the number of fields that I have in here and do a little bit of the first filter of the records as well. So I have already opened my NBN Data Explorer, which is a spreadsheet that has various macros in it, which I will use to refine the data here. You may find in your version of Excel that the developer tab isn't open automatically. To rectify that, you would go into settings and options, and you go to customize ribbon, and then you see his main tabs here. There are these tick boxes, so you would then tick it, make sure it's selected. So in the developer tab, going to macros, on the first run of this spreadsheet it will ask you for permission to enable macros, which is something you'd have to do. So in here I have a list of my macros. They're all prefixed by these letters. These letters correspond to shortcut keys that I would use to run them. You can change these shortcut keys by selecting them and going into the options. Let's see here, options. Control Shift and A, for instance, B, etc., etc. So these roughly, first half of the alphabet here corresponds really with the order in which you would use them. First of all, you reformat the large data sheet. Secondly, you create subsets of the data. And thirdly, you save them as usable attribute tables, replacing blank values with null, which is good from a programming point of view. These other 3 macros you would use at various other times, and it's kind of a bit more flexible when you'd use them. So I've numbered those differently. So I'm going to run the first macro. Gives this little warning here. It says, it's just for NBN data downloads. It's not for other worksheets. Are you sure? So I'm going to click no actually because I've missed a step here. Now this is the same data set, but what I want to show you is how I move that over from the CSV file. So my CSV file, if I can click the right one, I right click on the bottom of the tab, go to move or copy. You see a drop down list here that contains all the open workbooks. I pick my NBN Data Explorer. You'll see at the top here, this list are a couple that have the name data at the end. Now I like to leave them just underneath those. These are worksheets with data that I like to append to the other records. I like to have them at the top of the list to keep them handy in these drop downs. So you could create a copy if you want, but I'm just going to go with it. It'll take a moment to do so. So you'll see it's opened up here with brackets too because there's already a version of this open in here. So now I could run my macro through here, or I'm just going to press Control Shift A. It's easy to remember. It's giving me the warning. Yes, I want to use it. Put in a new name or accept the default. So I'll change that, and it will take a moment. So you'll see it's now changed. It's got the file name that I put in there, and it's suffixed by this .a to show that macro A has run with it. So next thing is I want to subset this. Say this is for a local field trip, and I don't know, we have a fungi expert who's interested in what fungi there might be in the area. So I've subsetted it with that. Potentially I certainly don't need records from 1692. So go to number filters. Now I'll go to greater than or equal to, I don't know, say 1980. And it's now filtered those. So you'll see the older years are, oh actually it doesn't show you which ones are in there, it's a separate thing. Never mind. You might want to change the level of coordinate accuracy as well. There's something under 100 meters. You could click these off individually if you want to. I'm not going to go for blanks. So there we have a subset of 25 of these records. You'll see that in the bottom left of the screen. Having filtered this list, and you'll see these filter signs at the top show that they are filtered at the moment. I would now like to export this subset of data. So I do that using macro B. So Control Shift and B. It'll take a moment to run. So you see that it's brought up this dialog box here where you can type in a new name if you want to. So I don't know, go for fungi lesson. Okay, 2000. Okay, 1980 onwards. 100 meter. Just as an example, it's good to have an informative title. There's a little guide here about characteristics that you can't use in here and how long this can be. So it's now going to copy this data to a new location, and it's already done it. And you see it's got this suffix here, .b. So this is all of the data. There's no filtering on here now. It's a little subset of data there. The next thing I might want to do would be to export all of this in a format that I can use in a GIS system like QGIS. So I have another macro for that. Is this save worksheet as attribute table. I'm going to run that. Opens up this dialog box. It takes in the original name as a kind of a default. I think I'll go with that. It's quite a good name. One thing to note here is where there were empty values before, it's now these null values. This is good practice if you use these data tables in a GIS system. So it's just populated those blanks with them. Now I certainly could have subset all this data before using the website, but for a hypothetical situation, let's just say this was a field trip with a variety of people going there. Some people are interested in, say, in birds, for instance. Oops, actually, very classy. Oh yes. So the idea is that you can just keep subsetting the data very easily. So I'll run that B macro again. Birds. And you can keep subsetting it. And a tidy, eh? One feature this does have that is potentially useful is you can just go with a default name. You can keep running this. If you're not really sure if you like what you've filtered, just keep pressing enter, and you see here each time you change it, it adds another B to the end of it. Now, it's not the best practice, but if you're doing things on the fly, it's kind of nice to not have to bother faffing around adding names all the time. And when you've got kind of the size of data you want, then you can change the name yourself. Another thing that might be quite nice to have would be a species list. Oh, that's because the filter's still in place. So do that. Go to your macros. Y species list. Oops. That's that. Okay, I'll do that again. There we go. So a little species list with a number of counts of each of these. What the most accurate data is and what the most recent data is. Now, for a field outing, it might be quite nice to be able to add to this some extra data. So the way this works is that these scientific names are used to unite data in each of these spreadsheets with like a master spreadsheet. In this particular case, I've been working mainly with plants, so I don't have this kind of level of data for any bird information here. But I'll show you how it works with some other data. So here's one I made earlier. So the way I do this is I press Control, Shift and C. It opens up this little dialog box. So the navigate to is optional. You might just want to export data from this sheet, in which case you would select the two column headers, well, whatever column headers you want, and then you would pick a target data, and you would then be adding this data to the other sheet on the basis of what's in this left-hand column here. This isn't what I want to do in this case. What I want to do is I want to go to my prioritization data. Now you'll see some of these columns are green already. What that does is it tells you that those have been recently used. So if you've been building up a number of different data columns to another sheet and you can't remember which ones you've done, it's kind of helpful to be able to do that. But you can save yourself a bit of trouble as well by multiply selecting. So you press Control and then you click with the different habitats. I'll talk a little bit about what I have in here actually. So I have a reference to a guide that I use. It's useful for me to have page numbers so I can find out where in a book they are. Pretty handy if I want to look up details. It's good to have that attached to an attribute table as well as a species list, so that when I look in the field on my phone, I'll be able to see what page number I should be looking at. So let's go with that one. Local presence or absence. Now I actually derived this by putting this on the end of this table from another sheet, again using this little dialog box to import things from one destination to another. I'd have had a sheet in here at some time that would have had a list of all the plants within 100 kilometers. Which I would then put a column with lots of ones in it, and then I would run this and it would move all the data from there to the end of this sheet. I just moved it to this column because it's much better placed here. It's quite a useful thing to use to sort your data, presence or absence. So yes, anyway, so that's useful, presence or absence in your area. Whether you've seen it or not, that's pretty useful. Native status. These are various categories that correspond to codes that can be found in a piece of work called the plant at document. So N would be all native, for instance. And this is stuff that I would use to prioritize species, which I'll show you a bit later. For now, I'm just going to pick some things fairly randomly. GB, how many tetrads there are in the UK in which this plant has been seen. Some details on habitat. These are called Ellenberg values. These tell you about the light levels, moisture, alkalinity, nutrient status, salinity of the soil, etc. And you might want to know, is it in bloom at the moment? So this is this column will have some characters about time of year for flowering. So 1 means it's flowering, 0 means it isn't flowering, unknown means that I don't have the data for it. There's also a probably flowering one. Anyway, so my drop down list, where am I going? I'm going to go for bladderworts.sl because this is a species list. This is where it's quite handy to have this information, just in case you're like, oh, I can't remember which sheet it was. Well, it was a species list I wanted. So it's now added them here. So we're missing some salinity data. It probably means that there's no salinity. So this actually just leaves the one macro left to run. So I'm going to go to prioritization data. So you see these are in green. These are the ones that I just imported there. Now I can use this to actually create a URL and go for a more focused search. So I do this by going and filter my data, data filter, and I'm just going to pick ones that are in my local area. Say I might want to look for only the native species, so that's that one. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that I'm only interested in, so what's this, light, so I think small numbers will be woodland species. Say that I'm just interested in woodland species. Actually, I could have used the number filter here, would have been a bit quicker. I'll go with that. Let's see what these are saying. Seem to be more woodlandy kind of species, and I'm just interested in ones that are in bloom. Either, yeah, we'll go for ones that I definitely know are in bloom in September. Ah, it's not a lot of species. Here we go. I've got this list here of native species that are present in my area that are in woodland habitat, fairly dark habitat anyway. And yeah, I'll have the page numbers as well here. So the next thing I do is I run my macro. Having selected that, I could select not just species, but potentially I could put in names of families and orders and things like that, and I could select those to get another kind of more generic search. So back to my macros. This one is create custom URL. So we run this. So see here, I have a couple of options here. Start date, years before today. I've been going by default for 20 years. Maximum grid size in meters, 10 meters. This will kill an awful lot of the data. There won't be much data that's that high resolution. It might go for 100 meters, say. Another thing is it's a WKT file. I'll show you how to make a WKT file in a moment. You'll see when I open that, it opens up this dialog. It's a file browsing dialog. So I have this WKT file in a notepad. I select that, press open. So it's telling me which file it's using, just in case. Okay, just in case I wanted to change that, I could go in again. I'm going to stick with this one. So create URL. So it's now taken a whole heap of information, this multi-polygon feature with lots of latitudes and longitudes. It's passed in stuff about the date and about the level of accuracy and about the species. So Control A to select it all, Control C to copy it, and then you go to your browser. So Control V and paste, and we'll see the results of this search now. So it'll take a little while to load up. This is quite a big search. So you'll see here that it's been searching for the following text. So it's found all of these species names. Date by decade, which is my to and from date, which is today's date and back in 20 years. Grid size 1 to 10 meters. Oh, I thought I'd changed that, maybe I didn't. Multi-polygon, which is this search area you can see on the map. It's 100-kilometer buffer. You then go to download, and you do it the same way. So one of the neat things about this, from a point of view of developing as a botanist, is that I could select by ones that I have or hadn't seen. I've only been keeping this up to date really for grasses because that's what I've been focusing on. But if you filled everything out and then you selected this to not include ones that you had seen, then you could just pick ones that you're not familiar with and use that to focus your search as well. So next thing to do really is to show you how to make one of these WKT files. So just go to Analyze. You'll see there's an Add to Map option here. And I go to Select Areas. So Add Method, point and radius, bounding box, all these kinds of things. Select from a polygonal layer, which is pretty cool. But I'm actually going to draw a polygon in this case. You can import shape files and KMLs as well. Very handy. So scroll down to the bottom of here, go to next. And I'm going to zoom in a bit. And let's say I'm drawing around my home county of Cumbria. Something like this. So this is what this polygon looks like. It'd be nice to be able to just copy it out of this box, but I can't. Just press next. And you'll see here this polygon shape has an eye for information associated with it. Next thing you do is you select just back till the word polygon. You go Control C, you go into a notepad, File, save as, Cumbria WKT. I've already got one, but it doesn't hurt to put another one in. Yes, replace it. There we go. So, very useful resource for making your own polygons. You can make them in QGIS as well. I'll show you a little more about using QGIS in a moment. I'd like to briefly show you a little bit about the use of QGIS, because this is another free piece of software. It's exceptionally powerful. It allows you to load different layers and import different plugins with different tasks. This layer that I'm just loading at the moment is taking a little while to render. It's quite a complex memory intensive layer. It shows travel time as calculated by a plugin. Plugins are extras that you add. Unfortunately, I have recently updated my version of QGIS, and the downside to that is that some of the plugins are now incompatible with my version of Q. You see here in red, this one, get WKT, for instance, is no longer compatible. Travel time platform plugin is the one that I used to create this file. These features are called isochrones, so the units are in half an hour. And this shows you from my house how far it takes, how long it takes to get to different places. So you'll see this is dependent partly on the terrain, partly on the topography of the area as well, with these hills increasing the amount of time required to get to places as well. A simplified version of this would potentially be a much nicer way of working out priorities for expeditions in terms of how far you're prepared to go for different species. It would be kind of cool to have a travel time with these isochrones. So I was just showing you that briefly anyway. So I have, you can zoom to different layers, right click and zoom to the layer. This you will have seen already. This is, I converted to a WKT file using another plugin that was in here called Get WKT, which, as I say, I no longer have use of because of using a more up-to-date QGIS. Hopefully they'll update these plugins so they're compatible. Anyway, it doesn't matter because I can make these kind of thing in the NBN gateway. So there are different layers that are internet-based layers. You can keep scrolling and zooming and see more and more detail. Very high resolution mapping. Much like the kind of thing you get on some of the phone apps we'll see later. What I don't have on here are permanent static layers that are rasters or vector layers which are visible and fully loaded without internet access. It's not so important for me when I'm at home using my computer, but QGIS also has an associated field app which you can use, and for that purpose it's really good to have some of these permanent layers that you can use without phone reception. So I'll show you, I've got file of sites of special scientific interest, and you notice I only have these within 100 kilometers. This was just about managing the memory demands of it for my phone. I did a process called clipping, which was to take, I basically use this as a cookie cutter on an original much larger file of sites of special scientific interest and cut them out just so they took up less space when I downloaded them on my phone. So mainly what I'm going to show you a couple of things here. I'll show you a previous layer that I made with a more elaborate symbology. Now there is a characteristic called hue, which can be used to describe as a value between 0 and 360 color space between red and blue. And I found that I could create a property in an attribute table which was varying between the different species, some 0 through to 360, and I used that for the center color of each of these icons. But then I realized these were very, very subtle differences. I decided what would be useful to apply on top of that would be some variation in the shape of these pieces. So I have this order of arrow, star, circle, diamond, arrow, star, circle, diamond, etc. And I ally these to different genesis. I have different external colors as well when they're, just to make these ones stand out, being very similar in center color and within the same genus, and they need to have different outline colors. It's organized that. There are people, I'm sure, who would be able to write code that would do this kind of thing automatically. I'm working on doing something in Excel which will use a species list and will then allow me to ally values for each of these individual species and their genesis with different characteristics and how they're reflected in a symbology. But that is a job for another day, and it's becoming a bit of a case of mission creep with this whole project. So you can switch these layers on and off, pretty handy, it's cool. Great piece of software. Certainly if you're an amateur naturalist and wanting to go towards professional ecology work, then you could do a lot worse than download QGIS and study some of the tutorials online and pick up what you can for it. It's a great piece of software. What I'm going to use it for today is I'm going to show you how to add another layer from a delimited text layer. Now, CSV is a kind of delimited text layer. It uses commas to delimit it, so it shows where the different fields are on that basis. So I'm going to upload this one called bladderworts. Yep, and it shows this table. Looks good in the table, seems to know what it's doing. Press add, and it's just added it. Just to remove any possible confusion, switch that layer off. So bladderworts, I could go in and properties, change all the symbology, etc. I could go to categorized and I could categorize them on name. I could go with random colors, classify, boom, there we go, apply. So you can now see that they're all different colors. Very quick to set up, very easy. What I'm actually going to do though is I'm going to save this. Oh, I'm going to pick some of these. See, we've got 3 different species in that area, I think. So I've just selected those, this little select tool. Right click, I go to save as. I'm going with a keyhole markup language or KML file. I'm going to ship this to Google Earth in a minute and I'll show you why. So I go to, I'm just going to call it bladderworts. Okay. Oops, I added it to the layer. I didn't want to do that. Never mind. So this is most of what I want to show you in QGIS. As I say, you would use this app and you would create permanent layers in this map and load tiles into QField if you were wanting to use this as your field app. It takes more setting up, but the more technically savvy of you will probably consider the investment in time to be very worthwhile. I'm going to concentrate mainly on a Google-based approach because I'm lazy and I prefer to do things quickly and easily. Now I'm going to show you a bit of use of Google Earth. So I saved this KML or KMZ, I'm not even sure which. They're both the same pretty much. Onto my desktop. We go to open with, you'll see there's a couple of different ways that I could open this. Let's have a look in the notepad just to see what it looks like. So you'll see it's a whole heap of different tags. It's basically a variety of XML. So it contains all of these tags and indicates how it marks features on a map. But that's just mucking about. It's interesting though, because if you open things in text editors, sometimes you can use find and replace functions to remove one tag and replace it with another. I've used that to convert polygon features into line features to display in maps.me before, although I have QGIS, so really I don't have a particular need to do that anymore. So this is Google Earth. It's a lot simpler to use in many ways than QGIS, but it is also a spectacular piece of software, and for some purposes it's better. So you have these different species. They all have the same symbology, which is not ideal. So let's add a few folders. So what I'm going to do here is I've multiply selected these, dragged them into this folder, rename Vulgaris, and properties, style and color. So basically saying they don't all share the same style. Actually they do, but you know, I'm going to change this to a different color. Boom, there we go. So add another file, add folder. So you can open and close these as well. So I've got this one called Stygia. Just drag this in here. Properties, style and color. What will I go for? Another color. Let's go for a yellow. I don't know. Oh, I've already used a yellow. Go for a lime green. So this is how you can quickly add some formatting to these. It'd be quite annoying to try and do this one by one. Oh, okay. That went inside one of these previous folders. So you kind of get the idea anyway. It would be a lot easier to, a lot faster to apply a symbology if this was a full-blown GIS. But I'll show you in a moment something that is highly superior with this piece of software you may or may not be familiar with. It blew my mind the first time I saw it. Anyway, you get the idea. So my purpose behind all of this mousing around is to show you how you go about investigating parking locations. So up here you can see we've got at least 2 different species. Oops. So I'm going to drag a little man down to the roads. Okay, so we've got a road up here. Oh, it's not got total coverage up here. That road does pass a bit further. Don't know, you can't expect roads to go everywhere. How's that? That's not, well, I think it would be easier on this to get to this side of the hill. Maybe something like this. So what I'm looking for now is a parking place in this location. Something else I'll show you actually is I have some utilities that most people have no idea exist. Very, very helpful. This is a grid reference utility. So if you have an OS map and you're trying to get a hang of where things are on an OS map whilst you're looking at Google Earth, this is very, very helpful. Another thing is this center target, because there's an element of guesswork otherwise when you place a waypoint. So these blue lines, when I pull this blue man down, these blue lines show you roads that you can look at in detail. Let's just see if I can find something that looks like it might be a lay-by or parking area. Something that isn't too cheeky. It might be too cheeky. Let's have a look. Nope, I think you can get away with, oh, it's maybe a bus stop. I'm not sure. Priority over oncoming vehicles. It's quite long for a passing place. Maybe. What does that say? I'm not sure. That looks a bit private. Well, let's, for the sake of argument, say that we've just decided that's a wonderful parking place. I'm not saying it is. I'm not sure I'd risk that myself. It might be a bus stop. Parking. So call that parking. Now I'm going to save place as, I'm going to put it on my desktop. So this is a KMZ or zipped KML file. There we go. So that's on my desktop now. So now I'll be able to open up a parking file, and I'll be able to use that in Google Maps, having found the location in Google Earth. I believe you do have a street view in Google Maps as well, but I'm not as familiar with using it. I'm quite used to Google Earth and I like it, so that's the way I do it. So I'll show you how I create a map in Google Maps. So this is a URL you use to access it. I'm logged in, you can see my profile picture here. So I have access to these on my phone and on my computer. I'm going to create a new map. Let's have a look at the different base map options that are available. I go with a satellite map, and I'm going to add some of these files from my computer. So as I mentioned before, actually I'm going to add this first while I'm in the correct folder. So this is a Perth and Kinross Sites of Special Scientific Interest map. I think these are possibly ones that I'd already turned into line features to be compatible with maps.me, which is something you can do in QGIS, or it's maybe I'm not sure. I think that's the case, because they seem to be transparent. So I'm going to add my parking place, which is on my desktop, and I'm going to add my CSV file of Bladderworts. So strictly speaking, I'll choose column to position your place marks, latitude and longitude. Very reasonable. Choose a column to title your markers. I would go with name. I'll load in a little while. There we go. And I'm going to add my parking layer. There we go. go. So I'm going to zoom in a bit. One persistent problem I have with Google Maps, I don't know the answer to why this happens, is that I can zoom in fine, but when I use this minus to zoom out, it just doesn't let me. But that's easily enough solved. You just need to directly manipulate the URL and change the number yourself. Very, very odd. I've tried it on other browsers and have this problem as well. It's a good job I know how to manipulate the URL. It's pretty simple. But yeah. So this is now a really, really funky custom map. I can do some other things to it. So I'm going to zoom out again. Let's go with 9 as a level of zoom. I think this is appropriate. We'll see in a moment. Yeah, okay. So I'm now going to go to this, add directions, and I'm going to type in my postcode. Then you can actually drag. Yep, so I've dragged the parking in there. Oops. However, I might decide that doesn't really. Oh, hang on. One thing I want to do, I want to change this from uniform style to style by name. There we go. Now I find some of these colours are far too similar to each other. It seems to pick random colours. Usually it does a more varied job of it than this. And which one will I pick on? I'll pick on this one. Make that a dark blue. Maybe I'll make this a purple or something. Actually, that looks quite nice as it is. So, if the objective is to see lots of species of bladderwort in one day, I might want to revise this map a little. So, just trying to... Not sure why it's doing this. I can add a destination, I can do it that way. And let's see what happens there. It's not quite what I had in mind, but you can drag these around. So let's go for this order. Yes, that's better. And let's say I want to add this as a destination too. There we go. So I now have a pretty funky route planned out here. What was that? Zoom level 9. Zoom out a little bit, see what this looks like. So I think I've taken most of those species. This is really just a hypothetical example. I'm not making a particularly great effort to plan this out in detail, but you imagine you get the gist of this. One thing I'm interested to see myself is, oh yeah, so it even seems to kind of give you walking routes to these things. I think I might wonder, looking at the aerial photographs, is that land really genuinely wet enough to have interesting rare aquatic plants in it? Well, I'm not sure about that now. Let's have a look how old the record is. Oh, it's a lot of species, a lot of flowers. It's 10 years ago. Well, maybe. It's interesting. Oh, look, bog, even NVC types there. Oh, that fills me with confidence. So that's pretty much shown what I can show you with this. Take it from me, this will sync with your phone. One thing I would suggest is perhaps to reduce your data overheads, you might prefer to use a more primitive map type. Mind you, it will allow you to cache them as well. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope that's been useful. Thank you for your time.
Welcome to my phone. I'm going to talk you through some of my favourite navigation apps. So far as I know, no one has yet produced a perfect phone app for following routes for field expeditions, but the standard of software is now so high that it's little to choose between a phone with free to download apps and a ruggedized tablet set up with the most state-of-the-art and expensive software. An ideal app would combine satellite navigation, offline mapping for areas without reception, an option for online mapping to display higher resolution aerial maps when a little more detail would be useful, symbology that is easy to set up and with a combination of shape and colour that could reflect several characteristics of a waypoint, support for point, line and polygon features and easily shareable maps and locations. If viewers know of apps that fulfill more of these criteria, then I'd be very pleased to hear about it. Until then, I have several navigation and track logging apps on my phone that I use for various purposes. Of these, there are three that I use the most: Google Maps, Maps.me and QField, all of which support offline mapping and the display of custom vector layers. Google Maps is my favourite app for executing wildlife searching itineraries. Google Maps tracks your position and stores that information online. If you can't remember where you went on a night out, the chances are Google Earth can and tell you all about it. And depending on how you feel about data privacy, that is or isn't a good thing. So this is an example. You'll see from this track log here it's very low resolution, it's not really following the roads. I guess it takes it at regular time intervals. I don't know if you can customize how regularly it will record. I tend to use my tracks if I want a track logger. What I really love about Google Maps though is the fact that you can create maps online and it will automatically sync through your phone so that you can view them on your phone. And perhaps the best thing about this is the ease of simplicity of the symbology. It won't ship any custom symbology, but it does allow you to pick a particular attribute of a feature. For my purposes, it would usually be a species name, and it will then adjust the symbology to reflect those species names and give them all an individual colour. And you can change that colour online if you wish to do so. It's pretty cool. You'll see also I've daisy chained some locations with this route plan. Google Maps, of course, is a fantastic sat nav. You can also store these routes and keep them. It will also support polygon features. Now, the main downside to this app, the only one I can really think of other than potentially the data privacy aspect, is the fact that this attribute table information is not viewable if you're offline. But on the other hand, you can still see the legend for the map whether you're offline or online. I'll show you the map legend here. So you can still pretty much use nearly every feature of the map if you're offline. You can share these maps with other people with a simple link and they'll be able to see that. And you can also share your current location for a specified amount of time, say an hour or you know, until further notice, which is pretty helpful if you want to go and meet people. Maps.me is another one of my favourite apps. It used to be my go-to. It's also very simple to use, all the mapping is offline, and if you have downloaded data from a Wi-Fi, it's always there to use, although it occasionally prompts you to upload updates when the maps are old. The mapping of rights of way is sometimes even better than those of Google Maps, and it shows shops and other facilities with very easy to read maps. As with Google Earth, the habitat mapping is not particularly high resolution. It would be, woodland, perhaps field, mire, water body, watercourse. But as with Google Maps, it will also show contours if, in this case, you select the terrain option. Oops. That will switch that on and off. It gives you a traffic layer as well, something about subway access and guides, which I think is something to do with learning what the local attractions are in an area. It's not something I've used very much. Maps can be customized by importing KML and KMZ files, which are common to Google Earth and which are also supported by QGIS and ArcGIS. Polygon features, however, are not supported, and you need to convert these to line features before you import them. So here we have boundaries of treble SIs. Downside to this is I can't actually select these line features to look at any of the properties of these line features. So instead I created, for each of these polygons, I created a point feature which contains the attributes that I'd like to mention in it. So in this case, things about habitat management. The main downside of this, in my opinion, is that you can't easily change symbology for a layer. You have to go in and change things individually for each waypoint. Potentially that's very time consuming. If you only had a few species, a few waypoints, it wouldn't be difficult, but that is a major downside to this, unfortunately. I do like the fact that it's very clear what maps you have cached offline and which you don't. I would use this by preference for any foreign travelling, when you really want to be sure what you have on your phone, and it was recommended to me by a professional wildlife tour guide. The last app that I'm going to discuss in any detail is QField. It's a professional level app, and it's associated with QGIS, and that's where you do all the setup. It can be used to support polygon, point and line features, and will also associate photographs with locations if you set it up right. I've not yet worked out how to do that myself. Doesn't have any associated sat-nav, and offline maps need to be set up carefully with the correct projection in QGIS, or they won't display in the field. It also supports online map tiles, which is great if you're in an area where you haven't set up the base mapping, or if you want higher resolution aerial photos. And you can switch these on and off. So I'll just switch this one off so that you can see that it also supports high resolution, scalable satellite imagery as well. You'll notice as you move around these maps, even if you are just using basic topographical maps, like it's taking a little while to load, there's a bit of a latency, which isn't something you get with either Google Earth or Google Maps or with Maps.me. And frankly, the quality of the offline mapping is only as good as what you set up. So it's not quite as convenient as having these very high level, high quality maps that are automatically set up by Google or by Maps.me. What is definitely superior about this app to all the others is that not only can you have the most complicated custom symbology you could possibly think of, but you can also switch on and off individual elements within a map. So for instance, if your map's looking a little bit cluttered with a species that you've already seen plenty of during your field expedition, then you can switch that one off and it will reveal any details that potentially you might have
several place markers on the same location. If somebody put out a tetrad and got several species in one point, you'll not necessarily see all of them. Of course, you can view the attributes of several layers, and it can be ambiguous, but it will let you. For instance, if I select this, I have a choice of either this layer here, or I can scroll through it, and then I can have a look at this information, which is about the treble SI, which is the layer below it. This is the most complex app to set up, and the effort required and the lack of a sat-nav means that for me, unless I wanted to intensely study an area of particular interest and wanted the most customized maps, the best symbology, potentially to append photographs or sound recordings or something to point or line features or something, then I would preferentially use Google Maps, or if it was in an area without data reception and I needed to see attribute tables, then I would use maps.me. But these are all very, very strong apps. I suspect that the people with the most tech savvy with GIS applications would probably prefer QField. Personally, I like the fact that with Google Earth you can even import directly CSV files. Sorry, Google Maps, you can directly import CSV files. So you don't even need to create any clever symbologies or anything. It's so easy to use and set up that overall I think it's the best app. There are some others that are honourable mentions. OS Maps is a very good app. It's free to download, but you have to pay for the maps if you want them offline anyway, which I would always want offline maps. So you do that by tearing a strip of silver off a land ranger map and then inputting an alphanumeric code. It then takes quite a long time to download the map associated with it. Now I'm not sure if I've got any of these visible, but take it from me, they are the best quality apps that money can buy. Very, very good. The only downside to it is that you can't import any point features, line features, or any of that kind of jazz. My tracks I mentioned briefly. I really like this app. It's a brilliant track logger. It will allow you to see things like a speed chart, which is pretty nifty, an altitude, spot on really, and you'll be able to see different photographs that are associated with different areas if you still have them on your phone. I don't think I do for this, which is why they're not showing, but it's nice to jog your memory about the places you've been. It's another very nice app. This compass is pretty cool. What I like about this is that you can point your phone in a particular direction and it will show you on a map what you're looking towards. And you can change the layers again to be satellite or a feature layer. It's quite nice. I think you can set a destination and head towards it as well, which is pretty cool. What Three Words is an emergency app. You can describe your location using a combination of 3 words. It's very high resolution. I think it's like 3 meters or something. I have a slightly puerile interest in this map. I like trying to see if I can find funny word combinations. Examples that aren't rude include ones like "nobody loves ecologist," which is amusing for me. Echoes is like a route sharing kind of guided tour kind of a thing that people can create their own routes and share them with other people. It's not something I've used an awful lot. But yeah, as I say, mainly those 3 apps on the left. OS Maps is great if you're in the hills. My Tracks is brilliant if you want to record your track log as well. I believe, as I say, there is some element of that in Google Maps. Maps.me you can do it with, and QField as well. But I quite like My Tracks. It's nice how it associates easily your photographs with your location.
A further thing I would like to mention is that unfortunately sat-nav use is very energy intensive, particularly if people slavishly follow the directions to a recorded location as closely as they can. Often the last few minutes of a position fluctuate, and it can be a lot of wandering around in circles. It can also be difficult to get a good position fix in woodland. Unfortunately, mobile phones are produced with the expectation that despite containing semiconductors that are mined in environmentally and socially damaging ways, users will change their phone every couple of years, in some cases deliberately manufacturing built-in obsolescence into their products. In my experience, one of the weaknesses of phones I have owned in the past has been charging ports, and I know a lot of people have problems with batteries. I like to carry an external battery pack with me in the field, and to keep my phone charged with it, but unfortunately cables and even charging ports can get damaged. An alternative might be to buy a higher capacity internal battery that require larger cases to house them. Unfortunately, it's increasingly the case that batteries are firmly fixed into place, and removing and charging batteries can cause screens to shatter. My current phone is quite an old make because I chose a model with a replaceable battery, and that allows me to fit an internal battery with a capacity of nearly 3 times the original. I chose this phone by looking on the GSM Arena website, which has a searchable database of phone specifications that allowed me to find a suitable model at my price range. Lastly, I would like to give thanks to some of the people who have helped me to make this presentation. Sophia Radcliffe of the NBN Gateway provided me some extremely helpful information that made it possible for me to develop the custom URL creation methods that I use to streamline my web queries. Stephen Coyne, with his YouTube and Facebook presentations on QGIS for ecologists, provided free training in QGIS. It's been very helpful to me. I'd also like to thank the tutor at Wise Owl Tutorials for making his comprehensive and easy to follow Excel VBA tutorials, again available to the public for free. I'd be grateful if you were willing to share my tutorial and my spreadsheet with any naturalists who might find these methods useful. I'd love it if people like my YouTube video and actually share my post on Facebook. A share is worth 1,000,000 likes. Furthermore, I'd be delighted to hear any suggestions from naturalists about improvements I could make to my methods, alternative app suggestions, and other data sources. If someone out there knows how to produce an easier, more inaccessible method, perhaps even to build mobile phone apps that will carry all this out, then I would be delighted to hear that. In the meantime, I hope you'll all find my efforts useful. I will include some links to resources in the description of this video. Thank you for your time.